We've all felt invisible at some point, dismissed by those who think they're better than us. For Claudine James, that invisibility became her greatest weapon. At 45, she scrubs floors at the Grand Leclaire Hotel while wealthy guests mock her in whispered conversations. They see a quiet black woman in a navy uniform and assume they know her entire story. They couldn't be more wrong. What they don't know is that Claudine speaks 9 languages fluently and has 18 months of intelligence training behind her patient smile. Every surface she cleans hides a listening device. Every hallway she walks maps an escape route. Tonight, diplomats gather for an elegant gala that's actually covering an international arms deal. When Claudine's cover is blown and she starts speaking Russian, Arabic, and Mandarin with deadly precision, those same people who laughed will realize the most dangerous person in the room was right under their noses. But will anyone survive? What happens next? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Grand Leclaire Hotel stood like a monument to old money and older secrets, its limestone facade gleaming in the morning sun that filtered through Chicago's downtown haze. Claudine James had walked through its gilded doors every morning at 5:30 for 18 months, her navy uniform crisp, her shoes silent on marble floors that cost more than most people's homes. She carried herself with the practiced invisibility of someone who had learned that being overlooked was sometimes the greatest gift life could offer. Her cleaning cart rolled smoothly across the polished marble, each wheel bearing precision engineered to eliminate the slightest squeak. To the casual observer, it was simply another piece of hotel equipment, industrial grey plastic housing standard supplies. But Claudine had spent weeks modifying its interior compartments. Hidden beneath false bottoms lay surveillance equipment worth more than her official annual salary, communication devices that could reach handlers across 3 continents, and tools that would have impressed her father had he lived to see what his little girl had become. Professor Emmanuel James had taught linguistics at Northwestern University for 37 years, and Claudine still carried his Mont Blanc fountain pen in her uniform pocket. The weight of it reminded her daily of Saturday mornings in his study, surrounded by books in languages most people had never heard of. He'd made learning feel like play, teaching her Arabic through children's songs, Russian through poetry, Mandarin through calligraphy that looked like art. By age 12, she could order dinner in 8 languages. By 16, she understood that words were bridges between worlds, and she had become a master bridge builder. She never planned to use those bridges for espionage. "Morning, Claudine." Marcus Chen's voice carried the warm authority of someone who had run the Grand Leclaire's front desk for 15 years. At 52, he possessed the rare combination of genuine kindness and sharp observation that made him invaluable in the hospitality industry. He also noticed things, the way guests' eyes darted when they lied about their identities, the subtle changes in staff behavior that suggested secrets. "Good morning, Mr. Chen," Claudine replied, her voice carrying the gentle deference that guests expected from the help. She had perfected this persona over months of careful observation, not too submissive to seem broken, not too confident to seem threatening, just right to remain invisible. Marcus watched her arrange cleaning supplies with methodical precision. Something about Claudine had always intrigued him, the way she moved with economy and purpose, never wasting motion. Most hotel housekeepers developed a rhythm born of repetition and fatigue. Claudine moved like someone who had trained her body to be an instrument of efficiency. Former military, he'd guessed, though he'd never asked. Everyone deserved their privacy, especially those who cleaned up after people who treated them like furniture. "Big night tonight," he mentioned casually. "Ambassador Volkov's people have been calling all week about security protocols." Claudine nodded, filing away the information. Ambassador Dmitry Volkov, Russian Federation's special envoy for Eastern European affairs, would be attending tonight's diplomatic gala along with representatives from 12 nations. On paper, it was a celebration of international cooperation. In reality, it provided perfect cover for Hassan al-Mansouri to conduct business that would never appear on any official ledger. "Will you need additional housekeeping staff for the event setup?" she asked, her tone suggesting nothing more than professional concern. "Elena's coming in early to help with the ballroom. David's coordinating security sweeps this afternoon." Marcus paused, studying Claudine's face. "You've been working a lot of overtime lately. Everything all right at home?" Home. The word carried weight for everyone. But for Claudine, it had become a carefully constructed fiction. Her apartment on the south side contained exactly what a hotel maid's apartment should contain: modest furniture, practical clothing, and just enough personal touches to seem authentic. The real Claudine lived in hidden compartments and encrypted communications in the space between who she appeared to be and who she really was. Just saving up, she said, which wasn't entirely false. Every mission came with hazard pay, assuming she lived to collect it. Elena Vasquez emerged from the service elevator, her own cleaning cart loaded with fresh linens for the diplomatic suites. At 28, she brought energy and curiosity to work that made her both an asset and a potential liability. She asked questions about everything, noticed details that others missed, and had developed an unfortunate tendency to appear in places she shouldn't be. "Claudine, perfect timing. I need help figuring out the new vacuum system in the penthouse suites. Mr. Volkov's people are very specific about cleaning procedures." Claudine smiled, genuinely fond of Elena, despite the complications her presence sometimes created. "Of course. Lead the way." The elevator carried them silently to the 42nd floor, where the penthouse suites offered panoramic views of Lake Michigan and price tags that reflected their exclusivity. Elena chattered about her weekend plans, while Claudine, mentally, catalogued sightlines, escape routes, and potential surveillance blind spots. The skills came naturally now. 18 months of deep cover had rewired her thinking until tactical assessment became as automatic as breathing. "You know what's weird?" Elena said as they entered the Russian ambassador's suite. "I found the strangest thing last week in one of these rooms. A tiny device stuck under the desk drawer. Looked like a hearing aid or something." Claudine's blood chilled, but her expression remained perfectly neutral. One of her surveillance devices had been discovered. Protocol demanded immediate assessment of compromise risk. "Strange," she agreed, testing Elena's reaction. "Did you report it to maintenance?" "I should have, but I forgot. Probably just fell out of someone's luggage." Elena moved toward the window, adjusting curtains that didn't need adjusting. "Though I have to say some of these diplomatic types give me the creeps. Last month, this Middle Eastern gentleman insisted I clean his room while he watched. Spoke to someone on the phone in Arabic the whole time, kept looking at me like he was evaluating something. Hassan al-Mansouri, arms dealer, terrorist financier, and Claudine's primary target. Elena's innocent observation provided crucial intelligence. Hassan was already conducting surveillance of hotel staff, likely identifying potential security vulnerabilities or recruitment opportunities. "Some guests can be demanding," Claudine said carefully. "Best to just focus on our work and stay professional." They spent the next hour preparing the diplomatic suites, Elena's constant conversation providing perfect cover for Claudine's real work. She planted 3 new listening devices, confirmed sightlines for tonight's operation, and identified 2 additional escape routes that hadn't appeared in the hotel's architectural plans. All while appearing to do nothing more than change bed sheets and dust furniture. The work felt familiar in ways that both comforted and unsettled her. Growing up as Professor James's daughter, she had learned that observation was a form of respect. Paying attention to details meant honoring the complexity of the world around you. Now those same skills served purposes her father never could have imagined. Phoenix to Sparrow. came the voice through her nearly invisible earpiece as they finished the ambassador's suite. Status report. Claudine touched her ear, as if adjusting. An earring activating the transmitter. Sparrow here. Nest preparation complete. Chicks arrive at 2000. Understood. Weather forecast shows storms tonight. Be prepared for turbulence. The coded message was clear. Intelligence suggested complications with tonight's mission. Hassan might be planning additional security measures, or competing agencies might be operating in the same space. Either way, Claudine would need to remain flexible. Elena had moved to the bathroom, testing cleaning supplies on marble surfaces that sparkled under recessed lighting. You know, sometimes I wonder what it would be like to actually stay in one of these rooms, just for one night. Sleep. In a bed that costs more than my car. The wistfulness in Elena's voice reminded Claudine of her own younger self, dreaming of worlds beyond her reach, before intelligence training taught her that dreams could become weapons, and weapons could become traps. Maybe someday, Claudine said gently. Maybe, though by the time I could afford it, I'd probably be too old to enjoy it. Elena laughed, but the sound carried an edge of resignation that made Claudine's chest tighten. They finished their work in comfortable silence, the kind that develops between people who respect each other's space while sharing the same daily rhythms. As they rode the elevator back to the service floors, Claudine found herself hoping that Elena would call in sick tonight. Some storms were too dangerous for innocent people to weather. David Morrison nodded to them as they passed the security office. At 38, the head of security possessed the watchful calm of someone who had seen enough trouble to recognize it from a distance. Former Chicago PD, according to his personnel file, though Claudine suspected there was more to his background than official records revealed. His movements suggested military training, and his eyes tracked threats with the precision of someone who had learned that vigilance was the price of survival. "Ladies," he said politely, but his attention lingered on Claudine longer than necessary, not with suspicion exactly, but with the professional assessment of someone evaluating potential assets or threats. "Mr. Morrison," Claudine replied, her voice carrying just the right note of deference mixed with friendly professionalism. The afternoon passed in routine tasks that masked extraordinary preparation. Claudine cleaned public areas while mentally reviewing tonight's operational parameters. Hassan would arrive at 7:30, accompanied by his security team and whatever additional protection money could buy. Ambassador Volkov would make his entrance at 8, diplomatic immunity wrapped around him like armor. By 9 o'clock, when the gala reached full swing, millions of dollars in illegal arms sales would be finalized through handshakes disguised as diplomatic courtesy. Her job was to document everything, identify all participants, and provide evidence that international prosecutors could use to dismantle Hassan's network. Simple in concept, potentially fatal in execution. As closing time approached, Marcus stopped by her supply closet. "Claudine, I wanted to thank you for your work today. Mr. Volkov's people specifically mentioned how impressed they were with the suite preparations. Just doing my job, Mr. Chen." He studied her face in the fluorescent light, and for a moment, she wondered if her cover was stronger than she hoped or weaker than she feared. "Have a good evening," he said finally. "Try to get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day cleaning up after tonight." If only he knew how prophetic those words might prove to be. Claudine changed into street clothes in the employee locker room, her navy uniform folded with military precision. Hidden in her locker, wrapped in an old towel, lay her father's fountain pen and a photograph of them together from her college graduation. He had been so proud that day, his daughter following in his intellectual footsteps while carving her own path. She touched the photo gently before locking the door. Tonight, she would honor his memory by using everything he had taught her. The languages, the attention to detail, the belief that understanding others was the foundation of protecting them. The Grand Leclaire Hotel settled into its evening rhythm as Claudine walked to her car. In a few hours, she would return for the most dangerous night of her 18-month assignment. Everything her father had taught her, everything her handlers had trained her for, everything she had sacrificed to maintain her cover, it all led to tonight. As she drove through Chicago traffic, Claudine James allowed herself one moment of honest reflection. She had become very good at being invisible, at letting people see what they expected while hiding who she really was. Tonight, that invisibility would be tested like never before. The woman they dismissed as just the maid was about to remind some very dangerous people that the most lethal weapons were often the ones you never saw coming. The Grand Leclaire transformed after dark, its marble halls reflecting golden light from chandeliers that had witnessed decades of power and secrets. Claudine returned at 6:30, her navy uniform replaced by an elegant black dress that marked her as event staff rather than housekeeping. Tonight, she would serve champagne to people who barely acknowledged her existence while documenting evidence that could topple governments. The diplomatic gala buzzed with carefully choreographed chaos. Embassy staff coordinated with hotel security, while caterers arranged displays that would have fed small villages. Ambassador Volkov's advance team conducted final sweeps of the ballroom, their efficiency suggesting military training disguised as diplomatic protocol. Everything appeared exactly as intelligence briefings had predicted, which should have been Claudine's first warning. She positioned herself at a service station near the ballroom's entrance, crystal champagne flutes arranged with geometric precision on silver trays. From this vantage point, she could observe arrivals while remaining invisible to guests focused on networking and the accumulation of influence. Her earpiece crackled with Phoenix's voice. Sparrow, primary target arriving ahead of schedule. Hassan al-Mansouri entered with the confident stride of a man who had never encountered consequences for his actions. At 54, he projected the polished menace of someone who conducted business in boardrooms and interrogation chambers with equal comfort. His security team moved like shadows, professional operators who understood that their employer's survival depended on their vigilance. Claudine served champagne with practiced grace while memorizing faces, cataloging weapons, and noting communication patterns. Hassan's men used subtle hand signals that suggested military or intelligence backgrounds. This wasn't just security. It was a coordinated operation designed to protect assets worth millions of dollars and thousands of lives. Excuse me, miss. Ambassador Volkov appeared at her service station, his Russian accent carrying aristocratic overtones that spoke of education and breeding. Might I trouble you for champagne? Of course, Your Excellence. Claudine offered him a flute while scanning for surveillance threats. Something about the ambassador's approach felt wrong. Diplomats rarely sought refreshments from service staff when embassy personnel handled such tasks. You have beautiful pronunciation, he said quietly, accepting the champagne. Your accent suggests formal language training, not casual study. Alarm bells rang in Claudine's mind. Volkov had spoken in Arabic, testing her linguistic abilities. No diplomat would engage hotel staff in random conversation using foreign languages unless they suspected something. Either her cover was compromised, or the ambassador was operating under different objectives than intelligence briefings suggested. I'm sorry, sir, I don't understand, she replied in English, maintaining her cover while assessing escape routes. Volkov smiled, but his eyes remained calculating. Of course, forgive my assumption. He moved away into the crowd, but Claudine felt his attention like a weight on her shoulders. Phoenix, potential compromise, she whispered, adjusting her earpiece. Primary diplomatic contact showing unexpected. Interest, static, answered her. No response from Phoenix, no confirmation of message receipt. Communication with her handler had been severed at the worst possible moment. Elena appeared at her side, wearing the black uniform of evening service staff. Claudine! I didn't know you were working tonight. They called me in last minute for extra coverage. This wasn't part of the plan. Elena's presence introduced variables that could compromise the entire operation. Innocent civilians in operational theaters created chaos that professional intelligence officers spent years learning to avoid. Last-minute assignment, Claudine, he said, maintaining her cover while mentally recalculating risk assessments. Stay close to me tonight, okay? Some of these international types can be demanding. Already noticed. That Middle Eastern gentleman you mentioned. He's been watching the service staff like he's memorizing faces. Makes me nervous. Hassan had noticed Elena. Worse, Elena had noticed Hassan noticing her. The situation was degrading faster than Claudine could adapt to new parameters. The ballroom, filled with diplomatic representatives from 12 nations, each bringing their own security concerns and hidden agendas. Conversations flowed in multiple languages, while champagne loosened tongues and lowered guards. Claudine moved through the crowd like a ghost, serving drinks while listening to fragments of negotiation in Russian, Arabic, Mandarin, and half a dozen other languages. She was refilling her tray when she overheard a conversation that changed everything. "The timeline has been accelerated," Hassan said in Arabic, to a man Claudine didn't recognize. "Our friend in Moscow confirmed that certain investigations are proceeding faster than anticipated. We move the primary exchange to tonight, immediately, following the ceremonial presentations. The arms deal wasn't scheduled for next week, as intelligence had indicated. It was happening tonight in this hotel." While she operated without communication support, and Elena wandered through a tactical nightmare in server's clothing. "Is the American source confirmed?" the unknown man asked. "Completely reliable. Our intelligence contact has provided flawless information for 18 months. Tonight, we eliminate the surveillance operation and complete our business simultaneously." Claudine's blood turned to ice water. Hassan knew about the surveillance operation. More terrifying, he had been receiving intelligence from someone within. The American intelligence community for 18 months. Exactly the duration of her assignment. Either Phoenix was a double agent, or someone else in the operation had been feeding information to Hassan while using her as an unwitting tool. She stepped away from the conversation, her mind racing through implications. If Hassan knew about the surveillance, then he knew about her. This entire gala might be an elaborate trap designed to eliminate witnesses while conducting business under diplomatic cover that would prevent investigation. "Elena," she said urgently, finding the younger woman arranging canapes near the ballroom's east wall. "I need you to leave. Right now." "What? Why? I just got here." "Family emergency. Your brother called." Claudine invented rapidly, hoping Elena's protective instincts would override curiosity. "There's been an accident." Elena's face went pale. Her younger brother worked construction, and accidents were a constant fear in their family. "Is he?" "He's fine, but he needs you at the hospital. Go. I'll cover your section." Elena disappeared toward the service exit, removing one civilian from what was rapidly becoming a tactical situation. Claudine returned to her position, but the champagne flutes might as well have been filled with poison for all the normalcy they represented now. Marcus appeared at her station, his usual professional calm replaced by subtle tension. "Claudine, have you noticed anything unusual tonight? Security concerns, guest behavior, anything that seems off?" The question confirmed her worst suspicions. Marcus had noticed something, which meant the situation was deteriorating beyond her ability to control it. "Some of the international guests seem more intense than usual," she said carefully. "Why? Is there a problem?" "David's concerned about communication issues. Some of our security protocols aren't responding properly." Marcus paused, studying her face. "You've been here longer than most staff. If you see anything that makes you uncomfortable, find me immediately." Marcus walked away, leaving Claudine with the terrifying realization that hotel security was also experiencing communication problems. Either someone was jamming electronic systems or Hassan's people had compromised hotel infrastructure, along with intelligence communications. She was trapped in a room filled with dangerous people, operating without backup, while serving champagne. To diplomats who might or might not be who they claimed to be, everything she had trained for, everything her father had taught her about observation and adaptation, would be tested in the next few hours. The crystal champagne flute in her hand caught light from the chandeliers, refracting it into rainbow patterns that reminded her of her father's prisms in his university office. He had used them to demonstrate how white light contained every color imaginable. You just needed to know how to separate them to see the truth. Tonight, Claudine would discover what colors were hidden in the seemingly clear light of international diplomacy, and whether she would survive the revelation. The Grand Leclaire's security sweep began at 8:15, 30 minutes ahead of schedule. David Morrison's team moved through service corridors with methodical precision, electronic wands detecting anomalies in walls, furniture, and fixtures. Claudine watched from her position in the ballroom, calculating the seconds until they discovered her surveillance network. She had perhaps 10 minutes before trained security professionals found devices that had taken her months to install. Without communication to Phoenix, without backup protocols, she faced a decision that would define the rest of her life: abort the mission and lose 18 months of intelligence gathering, or maintain her cover and risk exposure that could prove fatal. The hotel master key card in her uniform pocket represented months of careful preparation. She had reprogrammed it during her third week on assignment, gaining access to restricted areas that official housekeeping credentials couldn't reach. Tonight, that access might mean the difference between mission success and personal survival. Ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador Volkov's voice carried across the ballroom as he approached the ceremonial podium. Before we begin tonight's presentations, I would like to express gratitude to our gracious hosts at the Grand Leclaire Hotel. Polite applause rippled through the crowd while Claudine served champagne and memorized faces. Hassan al-Mansouri stood near the ballroom's northwest corner, his security team positioned to control sightlines and escape routes. Professional paranoia, she noted, the positioning of someone who had survived by assuming every social gathering was a potential ambush. Miss. A guest gestured for champagne, his English carrying a slight accent that could have been German or Austrian. You move very gracefully for service staff. Dance training, perhaps? The observation was casual, conversational, and absolutely terrifying. Guests weren't supposed to notice how service staff moved. Claudine's training had taught her to blend into backgrounds, but apparently her instruction had been too thorough. She moved with precision that suggested professional development rather than minimum wage employment. "Thank you, sir," she replied, offering him champagne while scanning his face for recognition. Mid-40s, expensive suit, hands that showed no sign of manual labor. Either a legitimate diplomat or someone with access to diplomatic credentials. Both possibilities were dangerous. Your posture suggests military background, he continued, accepting the flute. American armed forces teach excellent bearing. This was a direct probe, possibly a test of her cover or an attempt at recruitment. Either way, the conversation had moved far beyond casual observation into active intelligence gathering. "I'm just trying to do my job professionally, sir," she said, maintaining perfect eye contact while her peripheral vision tracked his companions. 3 men in similar suits, all watching their interaction with interest that exceeded diplomatic courtesy. Of course. Forgive my curiosity. He stepped back into the crowd, but Claudine felt exposed in ways that had nothing to do with her elegant black dress. The security sweep had reached the 3rd floor. Soon, David's team would discover listening devices that would raise questions about hotel security and staff loyalty. Marcus would be forced to conduct internal investigations that could expose her identity to Hassan's network. She needed to create distance between herself and the surveillance equipment, before anyone connected hotel housekeeping staff to intelligence operations. But first, she needed to warn Eleanor. Using her master key card, Claudine slipped into the service corridor that connected the ballroom to the hotel's main elevator system. The hallways were empty except for catering staff, who were too focused on their own responsibilities to notice one more person in black moving through operational spaces. The employee locker room on the basement level felt like sanctuary after the ballroom's hostile atmosphere. Claudine found Elena's locker and left a note. Family emergency resolved. Brother is fine. Go home early tonight and don't come in tomorrow. I'll explain later. Sissy, it was a lie, but lies sometimes protected people better than truth. Her own locker contained the photograph of her father and herself from college graduation. Professor Emmanuel James smiled back at her from behind wire-rimmed glasses, pride evident in every line of his face. He had taught her that knowledge was power, but also responsibility, the obligation to use understanding in service of protecting others rather than exploiting them. Tonight would test whether his daughter had learned those lessons well enough. To honor his memory. Sparrow to Phoenix, she whispered into her earpiece, hoping communication had been restored. Status report requested. Static answered, confirming that electronic jamming or system compromise was continuing. She was operating without support in hostile territory, surrounded by people whose loyalties remained unclear. The basement level provided access to the hotel's mechanical systems, heating, ventilation, electrical infrastructure, and security. Networks. If Hassan's people had compromised hotel communications, they would need physical access to control systems. Following ventilation ducts might lead her to the source of interference while providing intelligence on the scope of the security breach. Using her maintenance access credentials, she entered the mechanical room that housed the hotel's central control systems. Banks of monitors showed security camera feeds from throughout the building, while computer terminals controlled everything from elevator operations to emergency protocols. And standing at the main control console, making adjustments to security systems with professional competence, was a man she recognized from Hassan's security team. Claudine retreated into shadows, her mind processing implications. Hassan's people had gained administrative access to hotel systems, which explained communication disruptions and early security sweeps. They were controlling information flow while conducting their arms deal under diplomatic cover that would prevent immediate investigation. She needed evidence. Without communication to intelligence handlers, physical proof of Hassan's operation would be her only protection against accusations of rogue behavior or foreign infiltration. But obtaining that evidence would require getting past Hassan's security professional, who was currently modifying systems that controlled her escape routes. The man at the control console spoke quietly in Arabic. Primary systems are secure. Service elevator lockdown initiated. Security sweeps will discover surveillance equipment in 17 minutes. 17 minutes. The timeline was precise, suggesting coordination with security teams that included David Morrison's staff. Either David was compromised or Hassan's. Intelligence about hotel security protocols was more detailed than anyone had imagined. Claudine retreated from the mechanical room, her mind racing through options. She could attempt to disable the security professional, but violence would compromise her cover and alert Hassan to active opposition. She could try to reach David Morrison and warn him about the breach, but if David was compromised, that approach would be fatal. Or she could adapt her father's favorite teaching method. When you can't change the situation, change your understanding of it. Hassan expected to discover surveillance equipment installed by intelligence operatives. What if he discovered surveillance equipment that revealed information about his own operation instead? If Claudine could modify her planted devices to record Hassan's activities rather than simply transmitting to handlers, she might gather evidence while appearing to cooperate with the counter-surveillance operation. It was insane, dangerous, and exactly the kind of intellectual flexibility her father had taught her through childhood games that turned problems into puzzles. The security sweep had reached the 5th floor. Time was running out, but perhaps that urgency could become an advantage rather than a limitation. Claudine James straightened her shoulders and walked back toward the ballroom, her father's fountain pen a reassuring weight in her pocket. Tonight, she would honor his memory by using everything he had taught her about languages, observation, and the courage to think differently when conventional approaches failed. The most dangerous person in the Grand Leclaire Hotel was still invisible to those who thought they controlled the game, but that invisibility was about to become their greatest vulnerability. Elena was supposed to be gone by now, safely away from the Grand Leclaire and whatever storm was about to break over the diplomatic gala. Instead, Claudine found her in the service corridor, still wearing her server's uniform, tears streaming down her face as she clutched her phone. "Elena, what's wrong? I told you to go home." "My brother," Elena whispered, her voice breaking. "Miguel was arrested this afternoon, immigration detention. They're saying he was involved with some kind of smuggling operation, but he wasn't. He's been working construction legally for 3 years. The timing was too precise to be coincidental." Hassan's network had leverage over Elena through her brother, which explained how they had gained access to hotel security and why Elena had been called into work tonight, despite not being scheduled. She wasn't just an innocent civilian caught in operational crossfire. She was a hostage who didn't know she was being used. "Elena, listen to me carefully," Claudine said, her voice carrying calm authority that cut through the younger woman's panic. "Your brother's arrest isn't random. Someone is using him to control you." "What are you talking about? Who would—" Elena stopped, her eyes widening as understanding dawned. "The device I found in the diplomatic suite. You knew what it was, didn't you? You're not really just a maid." There was no time for gentle revelations or careful explanations. Hassan's security professional would complete his system modifications in minutes, sealing escape routes and eliminating electronic countermeasures. Elena needed to understand enough to survive the next few hours, even if that understanding shattered her conception of reality. "I work for people who investigate international crime," Claudine said simply. "The guests at tonight's gala aren't all diplomats. Some of them sell weapons to terrorists and drug cartels. They're using your brother to make sure you cooperate. With their security measures." Elena's face went through a rapid evolution of expressions: disbelief, recognition, anger, and finally determination. "What do they want me to do?" "Probably just report anything unusual you observe. Staff conversations, security procedures, maybe deliver messages between guests." Claudine pulled Eleanor deeper into the service corridor, away from potential surveillance. "The good news is that your brother's arrest means they need you alive and cooperative. That gives us leverage." "Us?" Claudine made a decision that violated every protocol she had ever learned about operational security. "I'm going to need your help tonight, and in exchange, I'm going to make sure your brother is released safely. But you have to trust me. And you have to do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you." Elena nodded, wiping tears from her cheeks. "What do you need?" The encrypted smartphone hidden in the hollowed-out hotel directory had become their lifeline when primary communications failed. Claudine retrieved it from its concealment spot, grateful that Hassan's counter-surveillance had focused on obvious hiding places rather than modified hotel materials. "I need you to take this phone and get out of the hotel," she said, transferring the device to Elena. "Don't go home. They might be watching your apartment. Find somewhere public with good Wi-Fi and send everything on this phone to the email addresses in the contact list." Elena stared at the sophisticated device that looked nothing like standard hotel equipment. "What is this? Evidence? Financial? Records? Photographs? Communication intercepts? Everything we've gathered about the arms-dealing operation. If something happens to me tonight, that information is the only thing that will protect your brother and stop these people." The hotel's public address system crackled to life. Ladies and gentlemen, the Grand Leclaire Hotel is conducting a brief security evaluation. Please remain in your current locations while our professional staff ensures your safety. David Morrison's the voice, but the announcement wasn't part of any standard security protocol. Hassan's people had compromised hotel communications and were using David's authority to control guest movement while they completed their arms deal and elimination of witnesses. "That's our cue," Claudine said. "They're locking down the building." "What about you? I'm going to make sure Hassan's arms deal gets documented properly, and then I'm going to find a way to get all of us out of here alive." Claudine smiled, hoping she projected more confidence than she felt. "Your job is to get that phone to people who can use the information to help your brother and stop international arms trafficking." Elena clutched the phone like a lifeline. "How do I know you're telling me the truth? How do I know you're not one of them?" It was a fair question from someone whose world had been turned upside down in the space of 5 minutes. Claudine reached into her pocket and withdrew her father's Mont Blanc fountain pen, its weight familiar and reassuring in her palm. "This belonged to my father, Professor Emmanuel James. He taught linguistics at Northwestern for 37 years. He believed that understanding other people was the foundation of protecting them." She pressed the pen into Elena's free hand. "If I don't make it out of here tonight, I want you to have it. But more than that, I want you to remember that good. People sometimes have to do dangerous things to protect innocent people like your brother." Elena's fingers closed around the pen, and some of the fear left her eyes. "You really think you can help him?" "I know I can, if you help me tonight." The security sweep had reached the ballroom level. Soon, Hassan's people would discover the surveillance devices and begin systematic elimination of anyone who might have knowledge about their operation. Hotel staff would be the first casualties, followed by any diplomats who weren't part of the arms-dealing network. "Go," Claudine said. "Use the service exit near the loading dock. Don't look back." Elena disappeared into the hotel's maze of service corridors, carrying evidence that could topple governments and save her brother's life. Claudine watched her go, hoping she had made the right decision in trusting a civilian with information that professional intelligence officers had died protecting. The announcement system crackled again. "Security evaluation will continue for approximately 30 minutes. We appreciate your patience and cooperation. 30 minutes to complete an arms deal, eliminate witnesses, and escape under diplomatic immunity that would prevent immediate pursuit." Hassan had planned this operation with precision that suggested extensive intelligence about hotel operations and law enforcement response protocols. But Hassan's intelligence hadn't accounted for a linguistics professor's daughter who had spent 18 months learning every secret the Grand Leclaire Hotel contained. Professional paranoia was about to encounter academic thoroughness, and Claudine intended to demonstrate which approach produced better results. She returned to her service station in the ballroom, where crystal champagne flutes reflected light from chandeliers that had witnessed decades of power and compromise. Tonight, those same chandeliers would illuminate the end of Hassan al-Mansouri's arms trafficking network. The invisible woman was about to become impossible to ignore. The lockdown announcement had changed the atmosphere in the ballroom, from diplomatic courtesy to barely concealed tension. Guests clustered in small groups, speaking in hushed tones, while security personnel maintained positions that looked protective but felt restrictive. Claudine moved between these groups like a shadow, serving champagne, while her mind processed fragments of conversation in multiple languages. Something about tonight felt personal in ways that transcended professional assignment. The precision of Hassan's intelligence, the timing of Elena's brother's arrest, the compromise of communication systems, everything suggested an operation designed specifically to eliminate her surveillance network. But why would an arms dealer invest such resources in neutralizing one intelligence operative, unless that operative posed a uniquely significant threat? The answer came to her as she refilled Ambassador Volkov's champagne glass and he whispered, in flawless English, your father would be proud of how you've honored his work. Claudine's blood turned to ice. Volkov knew about Professor Emmanuel James. More terrifying, he knew about the connection between her father's academic research and her current assignment. This wasn't random intelligence gathering. This was personal vendetta disguised as diplomatic business. I'm sorry, sir, I don't understand, she replied, maintaining her cover while her mind raced through implications. Of course not, Volkov said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Forgive an old man's rambling, though I should mention that I knew your father professionally. We corresponded about linguistic patterns in Eastern European dialects. Brilliant. Man, such a tragedy, his accident. Professor James hadn't died in an accident. He had been researching communication patterns used by international criminal networks when his car left a mountain road during what investigators called a weather-related incident. Claudine had been 24, finishing her graduate degree in international relations, when she learned that her father's death might not have been as random as authorities claimed. That suspicion had led her to intelligence work, the desire to understand what her father had discovered and whether his death was connected to criminal networks that used linguistic analysis to evade law enforcement, had motivated her through years of training and 18 months of deep cover assignment. Now she understood that tonight's operation wasn't about preventing an arms deal. It was about finishing business that had begun with Professor Emmanuel James's death 21 years ago. Marcus, she said quietly, approaching the concierge who had been watching the crowd with increasing concern. Can we speak privately? Marcus guided her to an alcove near the ballroom's service entrance, his expression grave. Claudine, something's wrong tonight. The security protocols, the communication issues, the way some of these guests are behaving, this isn't a normal diplomatic event. I know, and I need to tell you something that might be hard to believe. Claudine took a breath. Violating operational security in service of survival. I'm not really a hotel maid. I work for people who investigate international crime, and tonight's gala is covering an illegal arms deal. Marcus studied her face for a long moment. Former military intelligence, he said finally. I knew there was something different about you. The way you move, the way you observe everything. You're trained. You served. Army intelligence, Korea and Afghanistan. 15 years before I decided I preferred hospitality to hostility. Marcus glanced around the ballroom, his expression shifting from concern to tactical assessment. What kind of timeline are we looking at? Hassan al-Mansouri, the Middle Eastern gentleman who's been watching staff, is finalizing weapon sales to terrorist networks. The security lockdown is designed to prevent witnesses from leaving until business is complete. Claudine paused, weighing how much to reveal. But I think this is also about something else. My father was researching communication patterns used by international criminals when he died 21 years ago. Tonight feels like someone settling old accounts. Your father was Emmanuel James, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. Claudine stared at him. You knew. I ran background checks on all staff when I became head concierge. Professor James published research on linguistic analysis of criminal networks 3 months before his death. That research identified communication patterns that law enforcement agencies were using to track arms dealers and drug cartels. The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. Her father's research had threatened criminal networks by providing law enforcement with tools to decode their communications. His death hadn't been an accident. It had been assassination disguised as weather-related tragedy. Tonight's operation was designed to eliminate his daughter, who had spent 18 months gathering evidence that could complete his work. They've been planning this for years, she whispered. Who? Hassan's network, possibly others. They knew I would investigate my father's death eventually, and they've been waiting for me to identify myself through intelligence work. Claudine's mind raced through operational implications. The surveillance assignment was bait. They fed information to my handlers to ensure I would be placed here, at this hotel, during their arms deal. Marcus absorbed this information with professional calm. What do you need? Help getting evidence out of the building. I sent crucial intelligence with Elena. But if Hassan's people catch her, that information dies with her. Claudine reached into her uniform pocket. There's more evidence hidden throughout the hotel. Surveillance recordings, financial documents, communication intercepts. If something happens to me, someone needs to ensure that information reaches law enforcement. She handed Marcus a small piece of paper with locations written in her father's linguistic code, a cipher they had developed during childhood games that combined multiple languages with mathematical patterns. Your father taught you well, Marcus said, recognizing the complexity of the encoding. But Claudine, you can't complete this mission alone. Hassan has professional operators, diplomatic immunity and control of hotel security systems. I know, but I also know this building better than anyone else here, and I speak more languages than Hassan's entire security team combined. She touched her father's reading glasses, which she had retrieved from her locker and now wore as a connection to his memory. My father believed that understanding was the foundation of protection. Tonight, I'm going to protect a lot of people by helping them understand who Hassan al-Mansouri really is. David Morrison appeared at their alcove, his security chief's uniform crisp despite the evening's complications. Miss James, Mr. Chen, we need to talk. Claudine tensed, unsure whether David's arrival represented rescue or catastrophe. I know who you are, David said quietly, and I know why you're here. The question is, are you ready to finish what your father started? The security chief's words carried weight that suggested knowledge far beyond hotel operations. Either David Morrison was about to become her most valuable ally, or Hassan's network had just revealed another layer of their trap. In her pocket, her father's reading glasses pressed against her fingers like a promise that some kinds of knowledge were worth any risk to preserve. David Morrison led them through service corridors that Claudine thought she knew completely, but he revealed hidden passages that didn't appear on any architectural plans. Behind false walls and through maintenance spaces designed for emergencies, the Grand Leclaire Hotel contained secrets that predated its current ownership by decades. Built during Prohibition, David explained as they moved through narrow passages lit by emergency lighting. The original owners needed ways to move alcohol and people without attracting federal attention. Some traditions die hard in Chicago hospitality. They emerged into a secure office space that looked like a command center. Multiple computer terminals, communication equipment, and surveillance monitors showing feeds from throughout the hotel. But these weren't standard security cameras. The angles and clarity suggested equipment far more sophisticated than hotel operations required. FBI task force, David said, noting Claudine's assessment of the technology. We've been investigating Hassan's network for 3 years. Your intelligence work provided crucial evidence, but we needed operational confirmation to build prosecutable cases. Marcus studied the surveillance feeds with professional interest. How long have you known about Claudine? Since her 3rd week on assignment. Her handler, Phoenix, was feeding information to Hassan's network, so we've been running parallel. Intelligence gathering through unofficial channels. David activated additional monitors showing Hassan's current location and security positions. Tonight was supposed to be the culmination of both operations, Hassan's arms deal and our evidence gathering. Claudine felt pieces of a massive puzzle clicking into place. But something changed. Hassan discovered the FBI surveillance 2 days ago. Instead of cancelling the arms deal, he decided to turn it into a trap for anyone investigating his network. David's expression was grim. Tonight's lockdown isn't just about completing weapons sales. It's about eliminating witnesses, including federal agents, intelligence operatives, and hotel staff who might have observed too much. The implications were staggering. Hassan planned mass murder disguised as a security incident at a diplomatic event. The international immunity and media coverage would provide perfect cover for eliminating everyone who posed a threat to his operation. "How many people are we talking about?" Marcus asked. 43 guests, 12 hotel staff members, and at least 6 federal agents operating under various covers. David switched between camera feeds, showing Hassan's security team, positioned throughout the building. Hassan has 8 professional operators, plus whatever additional support money can buy on short notice. Claudine studied the surveillance monitors, her father's research methodology guiding her analysis. Professor James had taught her that patterns revealed intentions, and Hassan's positioning showed clear patterns of control and elimination. "He's not planning to escape," she realized. "The positions are defensive, not offensive. He intends to hold the hotel until something else happens." David nodded approvingly. "Excellent analysis. Hassan's buyers aren't just purchasing weapons. They're arranging transportation out of the country, private aircraft scheduled to depart from a suburban airport in 90 minutes. Hassan plans to complete his sales, eliminate witnesses, and disappear under diplomatic escort. Unless we stop him," Marcus said. "Unless we stop him," David agreed. "The problem is that conventional law enforcement response will take too long. By the time federal agents breach the building, Hassan will have completed his execution schedule and departed for countries without extradition treaties." Ambassador Volkov's diplomatic pouch lay open on one of the command center's tables, its contents spread across secure work surfaces. Documents in multiple languages revealed the scope of Hassan's network: arms sales, terrorist financing, and political corruption spanning 3 continents. But one document made Claudine's chest tighten with recognition: her father's research. Notes, photocopied and annotated with updates dated just weeks before his death. "He was so close," she whispered, touching pages covered in Professor James's careful handwriting. He had identified communication patterns, financial networks, even specific individuals involved in arms trafficking. "Your father's work provided the foundation for this entire investigation," David said gently. "His research methods, linguistic analysis, pattern recognition. Everything we've learned about Hassan's network started with Professor Emmanuel James's academic curiosity about how criminals use language to hide their activities." Marcus examined the documents with growing understanding. Hassan killed him to prevent publication of the research, and spent 21 years waiting for his daughter to follow in his intellectual footsteps, Claudine said. The personal nature of tonight's trap finally becoming clear. This was never about arms deals or diplomatic cover. It was about finishing what they started when they killed my father. The surveillance monitors showed Hassan moving toward the ballroom's ceremonial area, where a podium and presentation screen had been set up for diplomatic speeches. But instead of cultural exchange, tonight's presentations would finalize weapons sales that would arm terrorist networks across multiple continents. "We have maybe 30 minutes before Hassan begins systematic elimination of witnesses," David said. "Federal backup is 45 minutes out. Hotel security has been compromised, communications are jammed, and escape routes are controlled. So we improvise," Marcus said with military pragmatism. "Asymmetric warfare against superior numbers and firepower. Use knowledge of terrain to offset their operational advantages." Claudine studied her father's reading glasses, their familiar weight centering her thoughts. Professor James had faced similar odds when he realized his research threatened powerful criminal interests. He had chosen to continue his work despite personal risk, believing that understanding was too valuable to sacrifice for safety. "I know this building better than anyone," she said. "Hassan's people have been here for hours, maybe days, but I've been here for 18 months. I know every secret passage, every hidden space, every vulnerability in their defensive positions." "What are you proposing?" My father believed that knowledge was power, but also responsibility. Tonight, I'm going to use everything he taught me about observation, analysis, and communication to ensure Hassan's network is exposed completely. She stood, her decision made. But I need both of you to coordinate with Elena and federal backup. Get the evidence out of the building, ensure law enforcement has what they need for prosecution, and make sure Hassan's buyers don't escape with weapons that will kill innocent people. David and Marcus exchanged looks that carried 20 years of military experience between them. They recognized determination that couldn't be dissuaded by reasonable arguments about odds or survival probability. Your father would be proud, Marcus said simply. Your father's work will finally get the recognition it deserves, David added, handing her a communication device that would connect her to federal coordination teams. Claudine James walked back into the Grand Leclaire's marble corridors, her father's reading glasses reflecting light from chandeliers that had witnessed decades of power and secrets. Tonight, those secrets would finally serve justice instead of protecting criminals. The professor's daughter had inherited more than linguistic abilities and academic curiosity. She had inherited the moral courage to finish what her father started, regardless of personal cost. The hotel guest registry from 1995 lay open on David's command center table, its yellowed pages revealing entries that transformed everything Claudine thought she understood about her father's death and tonight's operation. Professor Emmanuel James had indeed stayed at the Grand Leclaire Hotel 28 years ago, but the circumstances recorded in careful handwriting told a story far more complex than academic research gone wrong. Room 4247, she read aloud, her finger tracing her father's signature. April 15th through April 18th, 1995, 3 days before his death. David watched her face as comprehension dawned. Your father wasn't researching criminal communication patterns from university offices, Claudine. He was conducting fieldwork right here, in this hotel, documenting arms deals that Hassan's predecessors were negotiating under diplomatic cover. The implications rewrote 21 years of assumptions about Professor James's final weeks. He hadn't been an academic accidentally stumbling onto criminal activity. He had been investigating specific threats to international security, using linguistic expertise to decode communications that law enforcement couldn't interpret. The car accident, she whispered, happened 3 miles from this hotel, as your father was driving to Northwestern to deliver his findings to federal contacts. Marcus had been studying the registry alongside her. Hassan's network has been using the Grand Leclaire as operational headquarters for at least 3 decades, but that revelation, devastating as it was, paled beside the discovery that awaited. In the registry's later pages, Elena's signature appeared in staff records dating back 18 months, exactly when Claudine began her assignment. But Elena's employment application contained information that made Claudine's hands shake as she read Elena Vasquez, hired as housekeeping staff on the personal recommendation of Hassan al-Mansouri's American business associate. Emergency contact. Miguel Vasquez, brother, employed by Morrison Construction LLC, David Morrison's construction company. The same David Morrison who had just revealed himself as FBI task force leader investigating Hassan's network. David, Claudine said carefully, how long have you been planning tonight's operation? 3 years, since we first identified Hassan's use of diplomatic events to conduct arms sales. His answer came too quickly, too smoothly prepared. Why? Because Elena's brother works for your construction company, and Elena was hired here. On Hassan's recommendation, Claudine stepped back from the surveillance equipment, her mind racing through operational possibilities. Either you've been unknowingly employing criminals, or Elena has been reporting to Hassan about hotel security and staff activities for 18 months. The silence that followed carried weight that transformed the command center from sanctuary into potential trap. Marcus moved subtly closer to the exit, while David's hand drifted toward his service weapon with practiced casualness that suggested professional training in threat assessment. "Elena discovered your surveillance devices 3 weeks ago," David said finally. "She's been providing Hassan with intelligence about your activities ever since. But tonight she helped me," Claudine protested. "She took the encrypted phone. She took a device that we knew contained false information designed to confuse Hassan's counterintelligence efforts." David's expression carried professional regret. "Elena believes she's protecting her brother by cooperating with Hassan, but she's actually been feeding him carefully crafted disinformation that led him to tonight's trap." The betrayal cut deeper than professional disappointment. Elena's genuine fear about her brother, her tears in the service corridor, her willingness to help despite personal risk, all of it had been performance designed to maintain her cover, while manipulating Claudine into operational compliance. "So who can I trust?" she asked. "That's the question, isn't it?" Came a new voice from the command center's entrance. Ambassador Volkov entered with the confident stride of someone who belonged in secure federal facilities. But instead of diplomatic credentials, he carried identification that revealed his true position: Deputy Director, International Criminal Investigative Task Force. "Agent Morrison has been my operational contact for 3 years, Volkov continued. "Marcus Chen is former Army intelligence, who has been providing security consultation on hotel vulnerabilities. Elena Vasquez is indeed Hassan's informant, but she's been feeding him information that we wanted him to receive." Claudine felt reality shift beneath her feet, like earthquake tremors. "And Phoenix? Your handler Phoenix died 6 months ago," Volkov said gently. "Someone in Hassan's network eliminated him and assumed his identity to control your intelligence gathering. Every report you submitted, every piece of surveillance data you collected, was immediately shared with the people you were investigating." The scope of the deception was breathtaking in its complexity. For 6 months, she had been working directly for Hassan's network while believing she was conducting counterintelligence operations. Every risk she had taken, every piece of evidence she had gathered, had been turned against the very people she was trying to protect. "But you said my father would be proud." "Your father would be proud," Volkov interrupted. "Because despite being manipulated by Hassan's network, despite having your communications compromised and your handler eliminated, you gathered intelligence that confirmed everything Professor James suspected about international arms trafficking. Operations." Marcus opened another section of the guest registry, revealing entries that spanned decades of criminal activity disguised as diplomatic events, names, dates, financial transactions, and communication patterns, exactly the kind of evidence Professor James had been documenting when Hassan's predecessors decided he posed too great a threat to ignore. "Hassan made one crucial mistake," David explained. "He assumed that controlling your handler meant controlling your investigation, but you inherited your father's intellectual independence. You gathered evidence beyond what Phoenix requested, documented patterns that exceeded operational requirements, and identified connections that Hassan's network didn't realize you were capable of recognizing." "The linguistic analysis," Claudine breathed, understanding dawning. "Exactly. Hassan's people speak multiple languages, but they think in specific cultural patterns that create predictable communication structures. Your father identified those patterns 28 years ago. You've been documenting their evolution for 18 months, Volkov smiled with professional respect. "Between you and your father, we now have evidence spanning 3 decades of arms trafficking, terrorist financing, and political corruption. The surveillance monitors showed Hassan's security team moving into final positions for tonight's elimination. Operation but their positioning revealed confidence based on intelligence they believed was accurate, intelligence that Eleanor had been feeding them under FBI guidance for months. "They think they control the situation," Marcus observed. "They think they know where all the threats are located," David added. "They think the federal response will be too late to prevent their escape," Volkov concluded. Claudine studied the monitors, her father's analytical methods guiding her assessment of Hassan's tactical errors. "But they don't know about this command. Zenta, they don't know about your task force coordination. And they don't know that Elena has been providing false intelligence about hotel security and escape routes. Most importantly," Volkov said, "they don't know that Professor Emmanuel James's daughter has spent 18 months learning every secret this hotel contains, while documenting evidence that will destroy their network completely." The hotel guest registry from 1995 closed with a soft thud that seemed to echo with 28 years of patient justice finally approaching its moment of reckoning. Professor James's work would be completed tonight, not by his daughter working alone against impossible odds, but by his daughter working with allies who shared his commitment to protecting innocent people from those who profited from violence and fear. Hassan al-Mansouri was about to discover that underestimating academic thoroughness was a mistake that professional paranoia couldn't correct. The emergency communication device in Claudine's hand connected her to coordination networks spanning 3 continents. But the weight of it reminded her of childhood phones she'd used to practice conversations with her father, in languages most people had never heard. Tonight, those linguistic abilities would coordinate international law enforcement operations designed to dismantle criminal networks that had operated with impunity for decades. "Sparrow to control," she spoke in Arabic, knowing that Hassan's team would be monitoring communications but wouldn't expect task force coordination in their own language. "Primary target maintaining positions consistent with defensive posture. Recommend initiation of secondary protocols." Volkov's voice responded in flawless Russian. "Control confirms. Federal assets in position. Hotel lockdown will be lifted in precisely 42 minutes, synchronized with tactical entry operations." Marcus checked his watch, a military timepiece that had survived deployments in 3 different theaters. Hassan's timeline gives him 35 minutes to complete witness elimination and reach his extraction point. "We have a 7-minute window to prevent civilian casualties and preserve evidence. 7 minutes to save 43 guests, 12 hotel staff members, and multiple undercover agents. 7 minutes to complete work that Professor Emmanuel James had begun 28 years ago when he first recognized that academic curiosity could serve justice more effectively than it served university advancement." "Elena's current position?" David asked, monitoring surveillance feeds that showed Hassan's security team moving through final preparation stages. "Service corridor near the loading dock," Volkov replied. "She believes she's protecting evidence that will bargain for her brother's freedom. Actually, she's about to discover that her brother was never in legal jeopardy. His arrest was fabricated to ensure her cooperation with our disinformation campaign." The moral complexity of using Elena's family loyalty as operational leverage troubled Claudine, but she understood the strategic necessity. Hassan's network had exploited family bonds to recruit assets and eliminate threats for decades. Tonight, those same tactics would be turned against them by people who understood that protecting innocent lives sometimes required difficult ethical choices. "Hotel fire suppression system," she said, studying architectural diagrams that revealed infrastructure Hassan's intelligence hadn't accounted for. "If we trigger emergency protocols, every sprinkler in the building activates simultaneously, creates chaos, disrupts sightlines, and forces Hassan's team to adapt to unexpected environmental conditions." "Flooding the ballroom during a diplomatic gala," Marcus observed with dark humor. "Ambassador Volkov, how do we explain that to international media?" Electrical malfunction caused by aging infrastructure, Volkov replied smoothly. These things happen in older buildings, especially during high-stress events with increased power demands. David accessed hotel maintenance systems through his security console, his fingers dancing across keyboards with professional competence that revealed training far beyond hotel operations. Fire suppression can be activated remotely, but manual override requires physical access to mechanical rooms that Hassan's people are monitoring. I can reach the mechanical systems, Claudine said. 18 months of maintenance access means I know routes that aren't on any current security surveillance. Too dangerous, Marcus protested. Hassan's counter-surveillance has been tracking your activities for months. They'll be watching for exactly that kind of tactical movement, which is why they won't expect me to approach from the wine cellar. Claudine replied, pointing to architectural spaces that predated the hotel's current configuration. Prohibition-era passages connect to mechanical systems through routes that current building plans don't show. Volkov studied her proposed approach with tactical assessment that suggested military experience alongside diplomatic training. Hassan's team includes former special operations personnel. Even with superior knowledge of terrain, you'll be operating against professional operators who have prepared for various contingency scenarios. My father faced similar odds when he realized his research threatened criminal networks that had operated successfully for decades, Claudine said, touching her father's reading glasses. He chose to continue his work because he believed that understanding was too valuable to sacrifice for personal safety. Tonight, I'm going to honor that choice. The surveillance monitors showed Hassan moving to the ballroom's ceremonial podium, where presentation equipment had been arranged for what appeared to be cultural exchange between diplomatic representatives. But intelligence intercepts revealed that tonight's presentations would finalize weapons sales worth millions of dollars while providing video documentation that buyers could use to verify transaction authenticity. Hassan begins his elimination. Protocol in 28 minutes, David reported, monitoring communications that Hassan's team believed were secure. First targets will be hotel staff who might have observed operational security details. Then diplomatic personnel who aren't part of his network. Federal agents will be saved for last. Professional courtesy among criminals. Elena appeared on surveillance feeds, still clutching the encrypted phone that she believed contained evidence crucial to saving her brother. Her genuine concern for family safety created vulnerability that Hassan's network had exploited. But tonight, that same emotional investment would work in law enforcement's favor when she discovered the truth about her brother's situation. She's been a good person, caught in an impossible situation, Claudine said, watching Elena navigate service corridors with careful determination. When this is over, she deserves to understand that her cooperation helped save lives rather than endanger them. Assuming we all survive the next 40 minutes, Marcus replied with military pragmatism. Detective Ray Morrison, no relation to David, despite shared surnames, appeared on external surveillance feeds, coordinating local law enforcement response that would support federal operations while maintaining cover story authenticity. His investigation of accidental deaths at the Grand Leclaire had provided crucial evidence about Hassan's elimination methods and timing preferences. Chicago PD perimeter established. Morrison's voice crackled through communication devices. Media blackout in effect. Official story remains gas leak investigation requiring temporary evacuation of surrounding buildings. International coordination required precise timing that accounted for different time zones, legal jurisdictions, and operational protocols. Hassan's arms sales involved buyers from 12 countries, each requiring specialized law enforcement approaches that considered diplomatic complications alongside criminal prosecution requirements. Swiss authorities confirm account freezing for Hassan's primary financial networks. came a report in French that Claudine translated for her colleagues. German intelligence has assets in position to intercept his weapons shipments. British MI6 is coordinating with Interpol for international arrest warrants. Her father would have appreciated the linguistic complexity of coordinating justice across cultural and legal boundaries. Professor James had always insisted that effective communication required understanding not just words, but the cultural contexts that gave those words meaning. Tonight, that principle would ensure that Hassan's network faced prosecution in every jurisdiction where they had committed crimes. 23 minutes until Hassan begins witness elimination, David announced. 19 minutes until federal tactical teams breach hotel perimeter, Volkov added. 4 minutes until we discover whether academic thoroughness can overcome professional paranoia, Claudine concluded, checking her equipment one final time. The emergency communication device felt substantial in her hand, not just because of its sophisticated technology, but because it represented connections that spanned continents and cultures in service of protecting innocent people. Her father's Mont Blanc fountain pen rested in her other pocket, its familiar weight reminding her that intellectual curiosity had always been her family's contribution to making the world safer for people who couldn't protect themselves. Marcus handed her a small device that looked like a hotel security badge, but contained enough explosive power to breach reinforced doors. Military demolitions training, he explained. Sometimes former soldiers need to adapt their skills for civilian situations. David provided her with electronic keys that would override Hassan's control of hotel security systems. FBI technical support, he said. We've been planning this operation long enough to account for various contingency scenarios. Volkov offered her a diplomatic passport that would provide international legal protection if tonight's operation extended beyond American jurisdiction. Academic credentials from your father's university contacts, he explained. Professor James had colleagues around the world who believed his research deserved protection. Claudine James walked toward the Grand Leclaire's wine cellar, carrying her father's intellectual legacy and the tools necessary to complete work that had begun with academic curiosity and would end with international justice. Behind her, surveillance monitors showed Hassan's security team preparing for systematic elimination of witnesses who posed threats to criminal networks that had operated successfully for decades. Ahead of her lay passages that would test everything. She had learned about courage, observation, and the moral obligation to use knowledge in service of protecting innocent people. The professor's daughter was about to demonstrate that the most dangerous academic disciplines were those that revealed truth about people who preferred to remain hidden. The Grand Leclaire's wine cellar descended into Chicago's limestone bedrock through passages that predated the hotel's official construction by 50 years. Claudine moved through darkness that felt familiar after 18 months of learning. Every hidden space the building contained, her father's reading glasses reflecting emergency lighting that revealed architectural details Hassan's intelligence networks had never documented. Above her, 43 diplomatic guests remained trapped in the ballroom, while Hassan's security team prepared for systematic elimination that would begin in 17 minutes. The hotel's fire suppression system waited for manual activation that would create chaos and cover for federal tactical teams. But reaching the mechanical controls required navigating passages that connected to areas under direct surveillance by professional operators who had planned for various contingency scenarios. Sparrow to control, she whispered in Mandarin, knowing that Hassan's team would be monitoring communications, but confident they lacked translation capabilities for technical discussions in multiple Asian languages. Approaching primary objective through historical infrastructure access points. Volkov's voice responded in Japanese, his diplomatic training evident in perfect pronunciation. Control acknowledges. Federal assets report readiness for synchronized operations. Recommend extreme caution. Targets have demonstrated willingness to sacrifice civilian safety for operational security. The passage ahead branched into multiple corridors that led to different sections of the hotel's mechanical systems. Steam heating, electrical distribution, water pressure regulation, and fire suppression, all controlled from central locations that required physical access to override computerized systems that Hassan's people had compromised from remote terminals. She chose the route that led toward fire suppression controls, her navigation guided by architectural knowledge that combined official building plans with months of personal exploration. The Grand Leclaire contained secrets that its current management had never discovered, passages and spaces that reflected Chicago's complex relationship with federal law during Prohibition-era construction. Footsteps echoed from parallel corridors. Hassan's security professional conducting systematic sweeps of areas that might conceal threats to tonight's operation. Professional competence suggested military training, but Claudine's 18 months of intensive familiarity with hotel geography provided advantages that tactical expertise couldn't overcome quickly. She reached the fire suppression control room as hotel speakers crackled with Hassan's voice addressing diplomatic guests in accented English that carried undertones of growing impatience. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm while security protocols are completed. Your cooperation ensures everyone's safety during this temporary inconvenience." The translation was diplomatic, but Hassan's Arabic instructions to his security team revealed different intentions. Begin first phase elimination in 14 minutes. Hotel staff first, then diplomatic personnel not essential to our transactions. Leave no witnesses who might provide testimony to international investigators. Claudine's linguistic abilities allowed her to understand not just Hassan's words, but the cultural contexts that revealed his strategic thinking. Arms dealers who operated successfully for decades developed professional paranoia that prioritized operational security over human life. But they also developed confidence that made them underestimate opponents who didn't fit conventional threat profiles. The fire suppression controls responded to her override commands, but activation required coordination with federal tactical teams to ensure maximum tactical advantage. She spoke into her communication device in rapid Korean. Primary systems accessed. Recommend activation in conjunction with perimeter breach to maximize environmental disruption of target defensive positions. Marcus's voice replied in Arabic. Federal teams confirm readiness. Hotel guests are positioned safely for emergency. Protocols initiate when ready. Her finger hovered over activation controls that would flood the ballroom with water from suppression systems designed to protect the building's artistic treasures and diplomatic guests. In seconds, elegant evening wear would be ruined. Priceless artworks would be damaged, and international diplomatic protocols would be transformed into tactical chaos that favored defenders who understood building geography over attackers who relied on predetermined positions. Above her, Elena discovered that her brother's arrest had been fabricated to secure her cooperation with Hassan's intelligence gathering. The revelation shattered assumptions that had motivated 18 months of unwilling collaboration with criminals who had exploited her family loyalty while planning mass murder under diplomatic immunity. "Miguel," Elena's voice carried through. Communication intercepts, speaking to her brother, who was safely at home rather than in detention. But they said, "They showed me arrest records." Hassan's security professional realized that their intelligence asset had been compromised when Elena's emotional response revealed the deception. Professional operators adapted quickly to changing circumstances, but adaptation required time that Hassan's timeline couldn't accommodate without risking federal intervention. Control. Asset. Elena is discovering operational deception, Claudine reported in Russian. Recommend immediate extraction to prevent compromise of tactical positioning. Federal agents moving to secure Elena, Volkov. Hassan al-Mansouri descended into the Grand Leclaire's wine cellar like a man pursuing personal vengeance disguised as operational necessity. Water cascaded through emergency drainage systems while federal tactical teams breached the building's perimeter. But Hassan's attention focused entirely on eliminating the woman whose father had threatened his network 28 years ago. "Professor James's daughter," he said in Arabic as he entered the mechanical room where Claudine waited among fire suppression controls. "You have your father's persistence and his unfortunate curiosity about matters that don't concern academics." Claudine stood with her back to equipment that hummed with the mechanical complexity her father would have appreciated, systems designed to protect people and property from threats they couldn't see coming. Her father's university identification badge hung around her neck, its familiar weight centering her thoughts while Hassan's remaining security operatives positioned themselves to prevent escape. "My father believed that understanding was the foundation of protection," she replied in flawless Arabic that carried undertones of cultural respect despite circumstances. "He understood that people like you profit from others' ignorance about how criminal networks operate." "Your father understood too much," Hassan said, his voice carrying professional regret rather than personal malice. "Academic research that identifies communication patterns threatens operations that protect thousands of jobs and billions of dollars in international commerce." Commerce! Claudine's voice carried her father's academic precision in dissecting euphemisms. Arms sales to terrorist networks that kill innocent civilians. Financial systems that enable drug cartels to corrupt government officials. Communication networks that coordinate human trafficking operations. Above them, federal agents moved through hotel corridors with tactical efficiency that reflected months of planning and coordination. Hassan's defensive positions had been compromised by water damage and environmental chaos, but professional operators adapted quickly when survival depended on flexibility rather than predetermined strategies. Hassan drew a weapon with practiced ease, while his security professionals maintained positions that controlled apparent escape routes. But Claudine's 18 months of architectural exploration had revealed passages that current building plans didn't document, routes that connected mechanical systems to areas that Hassan's intelligence hadn't identified. "Your father's research notes contained specific details about our communication protocols," Hassan continued, his weapon trained on Claudine while his attention remained alert to tactical developments throughout the building. "Linguistic patterns that law enforcement agencies used to track our operations across multiple continents. Research notes that you stole when you killed him," Claudine said, her voice steady despite circumstances that would have broken most people's composure. "Evidence that revealed how international criminal networks use academic institutions to recruit assets and identify threats." Hassan's expression shifted from professional necessity to personal recognition. "You know, the hotel safe in the mechanical room contained documents that transformed Hassan's revelation into devastating confirmation of suspicions Claudine had carried for 21 years. Her father's university identification badge, officially lost in the car accident that killed him, lay among papers that documented his final investigation into criminal networks that used diplomatic immunity to conduct arms sales under academic research cover. "Northwestern University provided perfect recruitment opportunities," Hassan explained, his weapon steady while his voice carried educative patience. "Graduate students with language skills, research access, and idealistic motivations that could be exploited for operational purposes. Your father discovered that some of his colleagues were providing intelligence to criminal networks. He was going to expose university faculty who were selling research to arms dealers," Claudine said, understanding finally completing itself. "The car accident happened because he was driving to deliver evidence to federal authorities." Evidence. that would have destroyed academic careers and eliminated intelligence assets that had required years to cultivate. Hassan's voice carried professional respect for Professor James's investigative thoroughness. Your father was an excellent researcher. Unfortunately, excellent research sometimes threatens people who prefer to remain unstudied. Federal tactical teams had reached the mechanical level, their communications audible through building systems that Claudine understood better than Hassan's security professionals did. Tactical advantage was shifting toward law enforcement operations that had been coordinated with international agencies for months of careful preparation. Your father's work will be remembered, Hassan said, preparing to eliminate the last witness. To operations that had spanned 3 decades of successful criminal enterprise. Academic curiosity serving justice rather than university advancement. My father's work will be completed, Claudine corrected, activating emergency protocols that she had spent 18 months learning to operate under various tactical circumstances. Emergency. Lighting plunged the mechanical room into darkness, while backup systems engaged throughout the building. Hassan's professional operators suddenly found themselves navigating familiar terrain that had become tactically unpredictable, while Claudine moved through passages that she could navigate without visual confirmation. Her father's university identification badge reflected emergency lighting as she disappeared into architectural spaces that predated current building management by generations. Behind her, Hassan's voice carried operational fury, mixed with grudging professional respect for academic thoroughness that had proven more tactically effective than criminal paranoia. Professor Emmanuel James's daughter had inherited more than linguistic abilities and intellectual curiosity. She had inherited the moral courage to use knowledge in service of protecting innocent people, regardless of personal cost or professional consequences. Tonight, that inheritance would complete. Work that had begun with academic research and would end with international justice. 3 months after the Grand Leclaire Hotel reopened under new management, Claudine James walked through marble corridors that gleamed with renewed purpose rather than hidden menace. She wore the same navy uniform that had made her invisible for 18 months, but now her position as director of security meant that guests approached her with respect rather than dismissing her as part of the background. The transformation had been gradual but profound. Hassan al-Mansouri's arms trafficking network had collapsed under coordinated international prosecution that used evidence Professor Emmanuel James had begun gathering 28 years ago. 12 countries had issued arrest warrants. Financial assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars had been frozen, and weapons shipments that would have armed terrorist organizations for decades had been intercepted by law enforcement agencies. Working with unprecedented cooperation, Marcus Chen had accepted the position of general manager with characteristic grace, bringing ethical business practices to an establishment that had hosted criminal activities for longer than most guests realized. His military intelligence background provided operational insight that transformed the Grand Leclaire from a venue for international crime into a genuine center for diplomatic cooperation. "Morning, Claudine," he said as she passed the front desk, where he coordinated with embassy staff planning legitimate cultural exchanges. The Ambassador Volkov's people confirmed next month's linguistics conference, 23 countries sending representatives to discuss academic cooperation in criminal justice research. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The hotel that had been used to facilitate arms deals would now host international scholars continuing work that Professor James had pioneered, using linguistic analysis to combat criminal networks that exploited cultural differences to evade prosecution. "My father would have enjoyed the conference," Claudine replied, touching the Mont Blanc fountain pen that still resided in her uniform pocket. He believed academic research served its highest purpose when it protected people who couldn't protect themselves. Elena approached from the elevator bank, her confidence restored after months of therapy and legal support that had helped her process 18 months of unwilling cooperation with Hassan's network. Her brother Miguel worked construction projects that built housing rather than concealing criminal activities, and Elena's position as Assistant Security Director utilized her detailed knowledge of hotel operations while honoring her courage in ultimately choosing truth over personal safety. "The new surveillance systems are operational," Elena reported, her voice carrying professional competence that had emerged once fear no longer dominated her daily experience. "Guest privacy protocols meet international standards, and security monitoring focuses on protecting people rather than gathering intelligence for criminal networks." David Morrison had returned to FBI operations with commendations that recognized 3 years of undercover work that had dismantled international criminal networks while protecting civilian staff who had been manipulated into unwilling cooperation. His final report praised Elena's moral courage and Claudine's intellectual persistence as examples of how ordinary people could serve justice when provided with truth rather than deception. Ambassador Volkov had been reassigned to lead international task forces that coordinated law enforcement responses to transnational criminal activities. His diplomatic immunity now served legitimate international cooperation rather than providing cover for arms dealers who had corrupted diplomatic processes for criminal gain. Detective Morrison's investigation concluded that 47 people died over 3 decades in incidents that Hassan's network disguised as accidents or natural causes, Volkov had explained during their final debriefing. "Your father's death was one of the first, but the intelligence you gathered prevented Hassan from eliminating dozens more witnesses who can now testify in international criminal proceedings." The hotel's wine cellar had been converted into a memorial space honoring victims of international criminal networks that had used diplomatic immunity and academic institutions to conduct operations that killed innocent people across multiple continents. Professor Emmanuel James's research materials were displayed alongside testimonies from other families who had lost loved ones to criminals who preferred to remain unstudied. Claudine visited the memorial every morning before beginning her security rounds, using quiet moments to reflect on work that had begun with her father's academic curiosity and had ended with justice for people who had waited decades for their deaths to be recognized as murders rather than accidents. The guests, who had once mocked her as just the maid, now greeted her with respect that acknowledged her role in transforming the Grand Leclaire from a venue for international crime into a genuine center for diplomatic cooperation. But Claudine valued different recognition. Letters from families of trafficking victims who had been rescued because Hassan's network had been dismantled, academic conferences that honored Professor James's research methods, and international cooperation agreements that used linguistic analysis to combat criminal organizations. "Your father's work is being integrated into law enforcement training programs in 28 countries, Marcus mentioned during their weekly security meeting. Northwestern University is establishing the Emmanuel James Center for International Criminal Linguistics, academic curiosity serving justice, just as he believed it should." Eleanor coordinated with embassy security chiefs who appreciated the hotel's commitment to legitimate diplomatic protection rather than criminal facilitation. Her linguistic abilities, developed through necessity during months of survival, now served international guests who needed translation assistance rather than criminal networks that had exploited her family loyalty. The Grand Leclaire Hotel's evening routine felt peaceful in ways that Claudine had almost forgotten were possible. Diplomatic receptions focused on cultural exchange rather than arms sales. Security protocols protected guests rather than concealing evidence, and hotel staff worked in service of hospitality rather than unwilling cooperation with criminal networks. As Claudine completed her final security round. She reflected on lessons her father had taught through childhood games that turned problems into intellectual challenges. Academic research served its highest purpose when it revealed truth about people who preferred to remain hidden. Understanding others was the foundation of protecting them. Knowledge carried responsibility to use learning in service of justice, rather than personal advancement. Tonight, the Grand Leclaire Hotel settled into silence that spoke of safety rather than secrets. Professor Emmanuel James's work was complete, not because his daughter had avenged his death, but because she had honored his belief that intellectual curiosity could serve as a weapon against those who profited from others. Ignorance and fear. The maid, who had been dismissed as invisible, had reminded dangerous people that the most lethal academic disciplines were those that revealed truth about criminal networks that had operated successfully for decades by remaining unstudied. Justice, like understanding, required patience, persistence, and the moral courage to use knowledge in service of protecting innocent people who couldn't protect themselves.